Over that time, when I used to do a lot of youth ministry and campus ministry, and whenever we did a discussion on the occult or the paranormal, people always came out. In fact, there was two big topics when I was in youth ministry and campus ministry that we always got students out. It was either the occult or it was sex.
Right.
So if you combine the two, I guess you get more people that come out. So we're not going to do that today. So, but I'm very appreciative of your invitation out here. Pastor Toma and I actually are seminary classmates together. So we were brothers in the suffering back in the day, right? Yeah.
So you're not retiring soon, are you?
I am not retiring soon. No. Yeah.
How many Concordia universities are there? I saw Concordia University in Irvine. I know there's one in Minnesota.
There's one in there's not one in Iowa.
Is
At least it's not. If it is, it's not associated with us. There's
Minnesota. I know.
Minnesota, Wisconsin, Texas, Nebraska. Yeah.
Oh, not one in Iowa?
No.
No. Huh?
No.
Wow.
If there is, it's not. They're a false. They're a
Minnesota,
false Concordia.
Wisconsin, Nebraska, California?
And Texas.
Really? How do you know that?
How do I know that?
Yeah.
Because we're a part of the CUS system. Yeah. So what's that?
Portland, Oregon too?
That one doesn't exist anymore.
What happened?
That one closed down.
What was the first one? What
So
was the first one?
I don't know. You're testing my knowledge. I'm not sure.
Stuff the pastor.
All right. Well, good morning. I was told that if I don't rein you in, then you're going to keep on talking. So I'm going to go ahead and start talking with you. So just give you a little background on myself. Like I said, I was in 26 years of ministry. I have a lot of background. I actually started off in ministry as a director of Christian education. I'm a proud graduate of Christ College, Irvine, as an undergrad. I did go on and had a call up in Burbank for the first 10 years, and I was a director of Christian education. I told people I did everything from basically cradle to grave ministry is who I worked with. During that time, I got my first master's degree in Christian apologetics. Dr. Rod Rosenblatt was a real positive presence on me as an undergrad, and so I thought I really loved this idea of apologetics. I wanted to go on and study, and so Biola University had a degree. A lot of the guys there who were my teachers and everything too actually were also taught by Dr. Rod Rosenblatt. In fact, the director of the program there told me that he is a closet Lutheran. So, and I told him he needs to come out of the closet, but he still has not. So, I've defense of the Christian faith kind of a thing. Yeah. So I went on and have worked in 2 different Concordias and in 5 different positions in those different Concordias. Partly, at Irvine, I actually have been there now for about since 2011, so however long that's been. And I worked for 7 years in campus ministry when I came back. And I pursued then my master's in a seminary degree, and that's where I was with Pastor Toma in the CMC program. So while I was there, and then I became an associate pastor in campus ministry, and then I transitioned actually to the faculty side of the house of Concordia. So I teach in Christ College, which is our school of theology, philosophy, church vocations, and biblical languages.
I was going to say, we started about the same time. I took twice as long to finish.
Yeah. And he's retiring before me. What's going on with that? Yeah. So then ever since going on there, being in full-time faculty side of the house, I went on and we have to get terminal degrees to teach, and that's the PhD. And so a year ago, I actually completed my PhD. I did that through Columbia International University, which is an evangelical university on the East Coast in South Carolina. And they do PhDs the way that the British do PhDs, which is basically if you have an idea of a research topic, they will connect you with an advisor and you just basically research and write. So it took me 4.5 years and I got her done. I did a successful defense last January under the influence of COVID. And so my topic, by the way, so while technically my degree is in intercultural studies, it's actually in the area of theology, it's missiology. And what I studied was actually, what I'm going to talk about today comes out of my doctoral research. And so what I was really fascinated in was this whole topic of how do pastors approach the paranormal? And the reason why I wanted to study that was because I have been involved in about a dozen cases of people who came to me and said, Pastor, I think my house is haunted. And so it's one of those things they don't prepare you for in seminary. There's not a class that says, how do you exorcise haunted houses? And so I was really fascinated in this topic because I'd done a lot of these. And so I knew some other fellow pastors who had been involved in these kinds of things. So I did a qualitative research where I went and I did interviews. So I interviewed 39 LCMS pastors across the United States. And I was really fascinated. I wanted to find out what did they believe was going on, and basically how did they approach this phenomena. And then I did a final critique of it through a missiological lens. And I'm going to talk about that portion here a little bit today in regards to that. And so it was a very fascinating topic, a lot of data from it. Every time I turn around, someone says, can I read your dissertation? I say, sure. Just to remind you, it's very academic. So my parents were really excited that I have this. So, proud beaming parents, they want to read my research. So I told them, sure. My dad always would say, I have questions for you. What does this word mean? And what does this word mean? And those kinds of things. So I tell people, I said, it's very academic. Yeah, you're welcome to read it, but very academic. Just keep that in mind kind of thing. So
Define your missiology, because I had to look it up.
So
I now know.
it's a study of missions and the way that we theologically approach it, or even through practice and those kinds of things. And so missiology, the idea is that we used to think that we sent missionaries over there. And really that's turning that missions happens anywhere. In fact, Pastor Tom and I were taught to be missionary pastors wherever we're placed. So North America is just as much a mission field as West Africa, as South America, as anywhere in the world kind of thing. So
We did our Bible studies on joining Jesus on his mission.
right, yeah, there you go.
Finkeys.
Yeah, with Finke, yeah. So
When you pull out of the parking lot, it says you are now entering the mission field.
right, yeah.
And those are Christian crosses on that sign. They're not swastikas like one of our neighbors said. Please don't tell us.
They sure look German to me.
They are German. Germans are Christian too,
Some of them.
They look like the Iron Cross that Hitler wanted.
Did you
Yeah,
ever
but
hear
they're
of a
not
group called
swastikas.
Exodus?
There's a,
No, that's not a
all right, that's what we were told.
What's that?
Did you ever hear of a group called Exodus?
Yeah, it depends which group that is.
It's a Christian deliverance ministry directed against Satanism.
Oh,
and the
okay.
occult.
Okay, I've not heard of them. I know there's another group called Exodus that deals with former homosexuals coming out of
No.
homosexuality.
Our-
Okay.
our normal stuff.
So what I want to do today is we're going to start off with a little discussion with you. I actually want to show you some videos. But before we get there, by the way, I'm not sure if you know where that whole phrase, things that go bump in the night, come from. It's actually from a Scottish prayer. From ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties and things that go bump in the night, good Lord, deliver us. So I think it's a great way of starting off. But one of the things I want to do is I want to show you a video. I'm going to let this kind of boot up. It's a slow boot up sometimes on my laptop, I notice. So I'm going to set this up for you. I'm going to show you back-to-back videos. And what these videos are is actually, these come from a school in Scotland, Deer Park School. This is video footage from 2017, it's January. It's CCTV footage, right? Closed circuit television. They caught it during a weekend when they were on holiday, right? And so what it looks like is that there's poltergeist phenomena going on. If you don't know what poltergeist phenomena, by the way, poltergeist does come from a German word that means noisy ghost. There are some people that think that Luther was the first one to coin that phrase. I couldn't find that, to be honest with you. I'm not sure if he really did or not. He actually does refer to poltergeist phenomena, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later today. But what I want to do is I'm going to show you the footage. It's going to show you down the one hallway, and then I'm going to show you a different set of footage that's going to show you down the opposite side of the hallway. Okay? And so what I want you to do is I want you just to watch this, and I want you to ask yourselves, what's really going on here? Okay? Just just we'll start that way. Does that sound good? We're all good on that one? All right. Yeah. It's gonna.
So if I don't see the clock at the top, it's not supposed to be counting down? Isn't that, is that the date? Is that a timer, 3:07? Oh,
That's not, oh, that caught me. Yeah, there's all four of them.
that's weird. It's a messy ghost.
This is real stuff.
Yeah, you'll know better.
Location Scotland. It's a school.
A school,
Uh-huh.
kids involved.
Yeah, yeah, it was actually during a weekend when they were all on holiday.
Yeah,
So
So they had time to plan.
they had time to plan.
yeah, what better
See, what
thing
got
than,
me is when it started, the light, the whole color of it flashed for a second.
yeah,
And then you
And I'm
got the
thinking,
sound.
okay, somebody green screened the rest of it, and then they put it back in, because that's what Hollywood does every day.
there you go.
And I would wonder too, just if it is a ghost, you know, could it be a friendly one?
Like Casper.
Like Casper. No, Casper wouldn't have thrown the books on the floor.
Too sweet.
Yeah, they would.
Here's Casper at a bad day.
He's misunderstood.
We all have our own.
Oh, maybe that's why. Let me refresh.
The energy to move and manifest these things. So in this case, I think it's just like,
Reloading everything back up.
you know,
He wanted to get back in his locker,
Or
or
that'd
something
be
he
one
left in his locker, so he.
there you go.
They didn't want to go back to the locker.
Oh, page not found. Let's see if we can do it again.
But let's talk about the food. Who made those biscuits? Those biscuits, they're like grandma's. Who made the biscuits?
Pillsbury.
Yeah, Pillsbury made those.
Grandma Pillsbury.
Grandma
The
Pillsbury.
jam, was that raspberry or strawberry or
That
berry?
jam
What's that?
was boysenberry. That was the bomb. That was the bomb.
Yeah, that was good.
homemade.
That was homemade.
Marla did
That's
that.
Marla.
You have a
Marla did that.
Zoom link on your computer? There'll be a link.
You're
There's this link right here that you sent me. Is that the one you're talking about?
Raspberry jam.
Oh, this one maybe?
Yeah, do that one.
Okay.
We were saying Marla must have hit that cabinet.
That would be, but somebody said,
All right. Are we back online?
Okay, good.
Those in Zoom land, can you hear me?
We can hear you, we need to see,
Yeah, no worries. I haven't brought that back up again, so.
but you're connected to Zoom.
Yep.
There you are.
All right. Sorry about that. We had poltergeist activity going on in the room, so.
It's alleged.
Ghost stole the charger cord.
We ain't no afraid of no ghosts.
It was a Dell ghost.
Could be spirits, but they're confused. They generally don't defend themselves.
are ghosts and spirits the same?
I think they were pissed off at the
Looks
locker,
good.
so obviously there's.
All right.
Yeah,
We
linguistically.
don't come back down, so it's all.
I think they want their stuff out of their locker.
King
Might just
James
open it, push it.
used the term ghost, and then
That's
the
what
modern
I think.
translation
It's an old
is spirits.
In the Bible,
And he wore a green outfit that the camera can't pick up, like the green screen.
Holy
He walked
Ghost,
over and
Spirit.
got his stuff out of his locker.
You're made up of your soul, your spirit, and your body.
And kick the thing on his way out. So
Yeah, yeah.
what's the motion? Was it an upward? Was it a side? Was it a side and up? It's a weird thing. The way it moved was weird.
Yeah,
All right, hold on a second. Sorry about that. All right.
Picked up and dropped.
Exactly.
Because
that's right.
So I'm going to show you the second video then. So it got cut off at the end, but you would have heard stuff coming down from the hallway that the camera didn't catch. Okay. So now this is from the opposite direction. Okay, that I'm going to show you, and it takes a little bit for it to pop up for me here. But all right. So some of you said, hey, I think it's demonic. And some of you are saying, well, but we can see some maybe plausible things here, right? Even the opening of the locker door, maybe there was someone behind there that was pushing things open, right? Maybe with the whole, the little tent thingy down there, whatever that is, the little wet floor thing. Someone could have had some like fishing line that they set up ahead of time, right? So, all right.
This is quite a bit afterwards, a couple hours afterwards.
Can you turn the sound a little louder this time? If you could turn it a little louder.
Come on.
Are you sharing sound on Zoom?
You know what? I think I don't have sound at the moment.
Yeah, share sound on Zoom.
Do you know how to do that?
Oh, there we go. You may not hear it. I apologize. I have to get out if I'm going to share sound. So it's not that big of a deal if I don't have sound at the moment because it's just knocking around. So.
I see it.
Is it rolling right now?
What is that?
There was something back over there.
What is that?
It's a chair.
It's a person kneeling.
It seems like it just kind of arched.
That's a chair over there.
See, this is 2 hours later, the last one.
Yeah, now it's 5:37. Oh,
So you saw
can you back that up again so we can see it again?
it was a backpack that flew off the top there.
Oh, flew off the top. Oh,
Wow.
well, there's a window there, so somebody's throwing something out the window?
It was,
Oh, was
it
off
was
the wall?
attached to the wall and it came off.
Bad glue. Oh, the chairs are moving.
That could be.
It went this way and then.
It's gotta be green screen.
Well, it wasn't attached to the door.
All right.
That's interesting.
Wow.
So again, what do you think now? Does it change your perspective? Do you think it could still be a hoax?
Yeah, I'd say it could be. When I see something like this, I'm like, well, could be supernatural, could be something else. I don't know.
Okay.
Because when the chair moved, you look at the shadow on the bottom. The shadow stayed the same the whole time across. How can that be? I don't know where the lights are, but if you're moving a chair, shouldn't the shadow kind of move with the chair?
Earthquake,
Oh, I missed the
earthquake.
shadow. I didn't look at the shadow.
There was something
I think it's like he said, it's an invisible guy that he's something when you can't see him, he's moving all this stuff, that's what he told the.
So
And it's
one other thing,
green, whatever he calls it.
here's the thing I want to share with you, right? So with the other side, right, we said there could be someone behind, right?
Right.
Now, in order to set up this stuff, you would have someone ahead of time that was tying like fishing line or something like that
He's got under
to
the
bring it
door,
over.
pulling it from the other
Right. Now, here's the thing I'll share with you. The principal of the school, when he saw this, his immediate response was, I don't think this is real. I think it's a hoax, but I'm not sure how it was done. Now, here's the other thing, too. What could we do to see if it actually was a hoax?
Go back in time.
Actually, no, it's not that much complicated.
Let's see if the shadow moves, can we rewind it a little bit, let's see if Gary's right.
Well,
Let's
just
see if
let's hold on and talk about this for a moment. All you have to do is you'd want to see the CCTV footage before these events, right? Because what are you looking for if you want to see before event? The setup, right?
Exactly.
So what's fascinating to me is that the principal, who obviously had access to the CCTV footage, doesn't say anything about the idea that there was a setup ahead of time, which should have shown up there.
Yeah.
Like
So
before somebody.
yeah, so either we have to conclude that he's a part of the hoax, right? Or it was just very clever of how it was put together without him being seen, or maybe there's something else going on here. I don't know.
Or
The takedown will be on the video too, otherwise there'd just still be fishing line or something attached to the.
Yeah.
That's right.
set up, take down.
But by the way,
Unless they altered it.
so this is actually one of my favorite quotes from Christmas Carol. This is Scrooge having a conversation with the ghost of Marley. And I find it fascinating because notice where he goes first, right? So the dialogue, "You don't believe in me," observed the ghost. "I don't," said Scrooge. "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your own senses?" "I don't know," said Scrooge. "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." And then Scrooge goes on and says, "You see this toothpick? I could swallow this and be haunted by all kinds of terrors and hobgoblins for the rest of my life." Now, why is it that we in the West jump straight to the skeptical?
Too much sci-fi.
Lot of TV and
We're very
movies.
Greek.
Technology.
It's out of the normal.
Why is this possible?
No, because we're all raised in an environment where we believe science rather than supernatural.
And let's be careful, though. What do we mean by science, though? Is science really the enemy?
Well, we always look for an explanation.
We do.
That's the why.
You gotta have me explain.
It's the evidence. We're raised to disbelieve the supernatural by our culture.
We're raised to disbelieve in the supernatural by our culture.
That's right.
The enemy, by the way, isn't science, but it's scientism. Okay? And I'm going to talk about what that means in a moment here. But I want to go on. And I want to show you another video.
That's a great video. Love it.
So, by the way, this one is harder for us to just dismiss as not something extraordinary going on. Let me set this up for you for a moment. By the way, what's fascinating is that Deer Park footage dropped in January of 2017. In December of 2017, the New York Times broke that the Pentagon has actually been exploring and investigating what they refer to as UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. By the way, we used to refer to those as UFOs. The reason why they don't use the term UFOs is because think about all the cultural baggage that comes with UFOs. Little green men, abductions, and those kinds of things. And so they say they use a whole new term because they want to separate it. Now, the phenomena that they're talking about is pretty much the same. Now, what got dropped, by the way, and what got leaked to the New York Times from the Pentagon was by the guy who actually used to be in charge of the investigation program with the Pentagon was the one that leaked it all. But the Pentagon doesn't deny it. In fact, they full on saying, yes, we have been doing it. They've come out and admitted that they have been investigating this phenomena. In fact, there was even a report that went to Congress. Congress actually did a whole investigation and a conversation in regards to what's going on. What this data shows is there's actually radar footage, hold on a second, of this data actually comes back from 2005, okay? So 2017 is when it dropped that the US federal government has been involved in the investigation of this stuff. The footage that they dropped comes from 2005. This is off the coast of San Diego. There was, on the radar, they picked up something unusual on their radar screen, and it was one of the carriers actually was there that picked it up. So they scrambled fighter jets to go check out the phenomena. So it's kind of underwhelming what you see here on the screen, and I apologize for that. But this is what they're dropping and showing that they're chasing this phenomena, and they're come to the conclusion, by the way, that while some of it they have actual explanations for it, there's a lot of this stuff now that's coming out that they can't explain. and they've done their investigation. They're using their good scientific minds to figure out what's going on. And that's why they said, we put it in the category of UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. It doesn't act like normal aerial phenomena acts, okay? So I'm going to show this to you. I'm hoping I have sound working
Government
here.
just released 350 new UFPs.
UAPs?
About 3 months ago, the government released 350 new sightings that they've been keeping secret.
So that's the UAP that they're following. That's the fighter pilot who is talking.
Now, the vertical bars, that's part of the radar as opposed to.
Yeah.
It's locked on.
Yeah, you can see some on the, yeah. So this is the stuff that pilots have been seeing for years and years and years. In fact, if anyone who knows their World War II phenomenon, this is the Foo Fighters, they used to refer to them as, which became the name of a really cool band in the 90s. But so this is the kind of stuff and now finally the government's saying, yes, we have been looking at this stuff. Yeah, we're sharing this with the public. Yeah, there is stuff out there that we don't know what it is. They're not giving it alien tag kind of stuff. They're just calling it the UAPs. And one of the things too is that they described is, in fact, the stuff that happened off of San Diego is that the aerial phenomena banks at angles that aircraft can't bank at, right? It changes directions real quickly, it zips across real quickly, and it appears and disappears like that. And so these fighter pilots are chasing after this stuff, and all of a sudden it'll blip off of one part and then come back again, and they're turning around. And so you can go online. Again, this is not conspiracy theory stuff. This isn't like Discovery Channel or History Channel, Ancient Aliens kinds of things. This is all legitimate stuff that the government says, yeah, we've been following this kinds of stuff.
Star Trek on steroids.
They say that the ships are propelled by mind. They stop and go, which can't be possible. They zoom off, and they're mind controlled.
Yeah, I mean that's
you can drive them with your mind. They're saying.
Yeah, so that's a theory. But here's the thing: I just want to talk about not the theory, but just the phenomena. We have now phenomena in front of us that our U.S. government basically has said, without actually using the terms, the paranormal. We do have empirical evidence of the paranormal.
Okay.
Okay.
And the paranormal is what we can't explain. Is that
And the paranormal, by the way, this is usually the typical definition of the paranormal. The paranormal is that which is outside of, lies beyond, or cannot be explained by routine, ordinary, known, or recognized scientific laws or natural forces. Paranormal claims or stories invoke or make use of forces, factors, dynamics, or causes that scientists regard as inconsistent with a satisfying naturalistic or materialistic cause and effect explanation. By the way, this guy's a sociologist that wrote this book. He was studying beliefs, paranormal beliefs in the United States. So this is the typical definition. Notice how paranormal gets described, though. How's it getting described? Outside, right? Paranormal, by its very definition, means beyond the normal. Supernatural, by the way, by its definition, means above the natural, right? So, but you notice how they want to say that, yeah, you've got stuff that you can know by science, and then you have other stuff that you can't know by science. And so we have this really interesting dichotomy going on here. But again, now you have this UAP phenomenon that's coming that they're saying, there's stuff that we're noticing in our natural world that doesn't act like what normal phenomena should look like. Yeah. Just hold on with your questions for a moment. Let me just kind of get through some of this stuff. By the way, in talking about this idea of that we've been led to believe that the supernatural is something that we shouldn't believe into, we go back to the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, and you have the father of sociology, Emile Durkheim. He was a French social theorist. He wrote a major work called The Elementary Forms of the Religious Life. Notice what he says here about the idea of the domination of, I'm going to refer to as scientism, right? So when this principle, the natural order of things, has once been omitted, all that is contrary to these laws must necessarily appear to be outside of nature. What did he say, by the way, about the paranormal? It's beyond, can't be understood through, right? So notice, Eric Good wrote that in 2015 kind of thing. He's saying this back in 19th century, early 20th century, right? Consequently of reason, for what is natural in this sense of the word is also rational. These necessary relations only expressing the manner in which things are logically related. But this idea of universal determinism is of recent origin. In order to arrive at the idea of the supernatural, it's not enough, therefore, to be witness to unexpected events. It's also necessary that these be conceived as impossible. That is to say, irreconcilable with an order which rightly or wrongly appears to us to be implied in the nature of things.
That's the main thing right there.
Now, this idea of a necessary order has been constructed little by little by the positive sciences, and consequently the contrary notion could not have existed before then. What's he saying here? Right? Now that we started to think about this idea of there being the natural order of things, and saying that we use our scientific thinking. Scientism, by the way, is this idea that science is the main way that we gain knowledge from the world. The main way or the only way that we gain knowledge from the world. And so once that came introduced into our philosophy, right, now we are saying things like, well, supernatural, because it's beyond the natural, we can't explain it by these means because we can only study those things that fall into this category. Now let me go on a little bit more for you. There's a guy by the name of Hebert, Dr. Hebert. He has since passed away. He's a Christian anthropologist, missiologist. He wrote on the topic of this idea of a three-tiered understanding of reality. And his study of other people groups across the world, he came to this conclusion that most people groups have this kind of three-tiered understanding of reality. So I want to go through this with you a little bit. He talks about the idea the top tier is the transcendent tier. It's the realm of God or the gods, heavens, hells, afterlives, those kinds of things. He said then that most people groups have this idea of a middle tier, what's referred to as this worldly. Interaction of spirits, magic with humans for good or for ill. And then he says there's the bottom tier, or what we refer to as the immanent tier. It's observable daily things, the natural order. So he says that you'll see this in a lot of cultural groups. So for example, if you've ever read Robert Bennett's book, right? He's CPH, Lutheran missiologist. He did study of the Lutheran Church in Madagascar. And he did study of how they go about dealing with demon possession and exorcism, right? In Madagascar, for example, this is their worldview. They believe in this idea that there's a transcendent realm, there's this middle tier, and there's this bottom tier, okay? By the way, I go and I do a lot of work on Navajo reservations. I have a buddy, actually we have a classmate who is a missionary pastor, on Navajo. The Navajo also have this same kind of, so you don't even have to go internationally to get this. It's in our United States as well. So Hebert, by the way, though, talks about how what we see, though, in the West is a split-level Christianity. So Christianity talks about this idea of there being a top tier and a bottom tier, but no middle tier. Now, Hebert himself as a missiologist noticed this problem when he was out on the mission field, that Christianity wasn't addressing this middle-tiered thing. So here's the thing. People who are part of indigenous groups who have this as their background, what they're doing is that when they've got phenomena that's going on in their life, they won't go to the pastor or the missionary. Rather, they're going to go to the witch doctor, the shaman, or those kinds of things. Our friend, Pastor Norton, who is a missionary in Navajo, shared this. He said that absolutely, when things happen on the reservation, they will naturally, even if they're Christian, they won't think about the pastor first. They will go find the Navajo singers, what they refer to it as, and he has a special song that he can sing. It's like a chant, a ritual, and you have to pay $2,000 to the guy for him to get rid of the phenomenon in your home. And so Pastor Tim told me one time that he actually had family in his congregation that they went initially to that guy and they said it was $2,000 and they're like, well, we can't pay for that. Then they went to Pastor Tim. Yeah. Right? So, but notice how they don't naturally go to the Christian guy. Let me give you another example. A number of years ago, I was having a conversation with a gal when I was in Texas. She was a youth minister at DCE, and she was telling me a story about how she was doing a whole study on the occult, and one of her kids in the group said, yeah, you know, our family has experienced some haunting phenomena in our home. And she said to them, oh, did you go to the pastors? And they're like, no, we didn't go to the pastors. And so they said, well, where did you go? We went to a shaman. These were Anglos, by the way, folks. These weren't Native American people. These were Anglos. So, and she said, well, why did you go to the shaman? Why didn't you go to the pastors? We didn't think the pastors would believe us.
Yep. That's when, if you survey, and you have done this, so you know more than I do.
Yep.
And you ask pastors, a lot of pastors will deny that phenomenon exists. The Catholic Church, which used to be, you know, the place for exorcisms, half the priests won't do half.
Right.
More than that, won't do exorcism.
Yep.
And yet, what do people do then that encounter this kind of thing? I'm going to let you tell us that.
Yeah.
By the way, getting back to Hebert, he noticed, by the way, that this three-tiered understanding of reality, looking at historically, the entire world actually used to believe that way. Until the 17th and 18th centuries. What happened in the West in the 17th and 18th centuries?
Science.
The Age of Enlightenment, right? When the Age of Enlightenment began,
Science all along.
Yeah.
Enlightenment is the difference.
And again, science isn't the issue, it's scientism, right? And this idea, the insistence upon rationalism, empiricism, all these kinds of things. This began at that point in time, and you began to see this split going on. We see the scientific revolution, and he says this, he concludes this, the secularization of science, right? By the way, science began, the scientific revolution during the Renaissance, that started out of Christianity. Our science started out of Christianity, and by the way, also the other monotheistic faiths. Why? Because Judaism, Islam, and Christianity all believe in a creator God and believe that he actually created a physical universe that we could study. So the father of genetic studies was a monk, right? He believed in a creator God, and he was doing things in his garden and doing cross-pollination and those kinds of things. So it's not an enemy to the Christian faith. I always have to hit that home with my students at Concordia. So science isn't the enemy, right? What he says here, the secularization of science and the mystification of religion. Science was based on the certitudes of sense experience, experimentation, and proof. Religion was left with faith and visions, dreams, and inner feelings. Science sought order and natural laws. Religion was brought in to deal with miracles and exceptions in the natural order, but these decreased as scientific knowledge expanded. Now, I want to give you an example. I'll read this for you. This is an example, by the way, of the church saying, yeah, we don't believe in this middle tier phenomena anymore. This came from a book called Ministry of Persons and Mental Illnesses and Their Families. And I'll read this for you. More specifically, religious traditions have not been helpful in creating a compassionate disposition towards those with mental illness, as various sacred texts such as the Bible would evidence. Seeking to explain the sometimes bizarre behavior of those who were mentally ill, the origin of the phenomenon was ascribed to demon possession. Demon possession basically meant that there were external malevolent powers loose in the world that were working in opposition to the benevolent powers of God. The fate of those so possessed has had a long, brutal, and bloody history perpetuated by society and religion. The marginalization of such people can be seen in the biblical narrative written in Mark 5, 1 through 20. That's the story of Legion, by the way. While the layers of that narrative are likely too thick to make a medical diagnosis, the evidence extant in the story might suggest that this man suffered from a mental illness that featured psychotic episodes, all attributed to being possessed by demonic powers. Exorcism was the singular treatment of choice, simply because knowledge of mental illness as we know them today had not yet been discovered.
That's the thing that I keep seeing this whole time about everything you're talking about is what mankind knows and understands about.
Yep.
That's beyond what we're witnessing.
But that doesn't account for the pigs.
Right.
And it doesn't account for them being healed afterwards.
Right.
It was porcine mental illness, come on.
You know, they're saying that those spaceships, that spaceship you saw, it stops and goes, and our normal airplanes can't do it. They're saying it's mentally, you can mind control their ships just like they mind control large objects, just like Easter Island. There's 20-ton statues, 40,000 pounds on this island. They're perfectly lined. And how did that get like that? Because they can move large objects, it's like their spaceship, and line them up. That's how they lined up on an island like that. No people did that. That was lined up by other people. Man.
Well, we're going to put that theory aside for the moment, okay? So, by the way, you'll notice again, right? This is where we got to. This idea when you remove the middle tier, we have this top level and this bottom level tier, and what you see is this idea that now anything that looks supernatural, well, we have to have a natural explanation to it. Here's the thing: you and I, as children of the West, that's why we naturally go, whenever we see phenomena, we're going to go first and foremost, well, how's that naturally explained? We're not going to immediately go to any kind of supernatural understanding because we've been taught that that extraordinary evidence or extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary evidence, right?
You lost your audio on the Zoom.
Oh.
I'm not sure why.
For how long?
We hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We hear you, but there's no audio from your presentation.
Oh, there's no audio on my presentation.
Yes, we do hear you.
Okay, that's all you need to know.
Maybe I lost you.
It's a Dell ghost again.
Yeah.
I think it's poltergeist, except the opposite, it's a silent ghost.
That's right. It's not the noisy ghost, yeah.
You ever hear Easter Island?
So,
Yeah, it's a neat place. Nobody lives there, do they? Do people live on it?
yeah, there's people that live there. But yeah, by the way,
Where's that island?
so one of the things I want to talk about is this idea of reclaiming a three-tiered view of reality. And why? First and foremost, because I think it's biblical. And I'm going to show that to you in a moment. It's also an important part of our Reformation history, right, which is grounded in sola scriptura. And it also helps with our missional engagement with our culture. And I'm going to briefly talk on this too as well. But let me first and foremost show you a biblical understanding of the three-tiered reality. The upper tier, right, that cosmic level is God. 1 Kings 8:27, it says that you are above the highest heavens, right? That you are above all things. Then we have this middle tier, right, that is composed of angels and demons. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2 talks about this idea of the prince of the power of the air, right? This understanding that it's on this kind of a realm that's going on. By the way, I don't like to use a designation natural and supernatural, but rather we should use a designation in our Nicene Creed. Things seen and unseen, right? Right? This is part of God's unseen creation, because really, if you want to say that anything's supernatural that's beyond our natural world, that's God, right? The lower tier, by the way, is that empirical, right? Humanity, animals, etc. Genesis 2:7, that's our seen creation. So we really realize that this is a part of our biblical worldview, this idea of a three-tiered understanding of the world, and that the unseen creation does interact with our world. In fact, what's fascinating to me is that really this unseen, or like the older interpretation of the Nicene Creed, we call it things visible and invisible, right? If something's invisible, does it mean it's not there, right? It's still there. I think of the story, by the way, of Elisha, and he has that story where he has a servant that's kind of really wigging out on him. I'm just going to quickly paraphrase it. Why? Because their enemies have gathered around and they've got their horses and their chariots. And so Elisha prays for his servant and he says, let his eyes be open to see basically what I see. And so the servant's eyes was open, and what did he see? On the hills surrounding were the chariots and the hosts of heaven. It was right, all the angels were there. But the idea there is they were invisible, but they were always there. Just because you can see them doesn't mean that they all of a sudden appeared at that point in time.
You said it looked like a chariot on fire coming out of the sky.
Well, that was Ezekiel.
Ezekiel,
Yeah.
okay.
By the way, what's also fascinating is if you look at the account of the 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus. Do you remember who was walking with them that they didn't notice who it was originally? Right? Jesus. And it was said that it was in the breaking of bread that their eyes were opened, and Jesus at that point disappeared. By the way, the Greek word that gets used there is basically that he is actually veiled from their eyes. So it's not to say that Jesus all of a sudden like, bloop, beam me up, Scotty. He was still present, he just wasn't seen. And by the way, just a fun side note, I think that's a great passage about the sacrament.
It is, yeah.
Right?
Communion.
He was seen in the breaking of bread, right?
So Ezekiel saw a chariot and Elijah saw a chariot too in the sky?
Different kind of shit.
Yeah, different stuff going on. Yeah.
Different kind of chariot?
Yeah. One was armies of God, and the other one was transportation of God for Elijah for
Ezekiel?
Hey, Brian, do you want to mute yourself? Or is-
One was what? One was what? What were you saying?
So I want to talk a little bit about our American context, and this is where it gets in this idea of mission stuff, why it's important for us as a church to engage with this. By the way, statistics speaking, 1 in every 4 Americans holds some type of paranormal belief. What is meant by that, by the way, is a broad category of paranormal. Paranormal can include things like poltergeist activity. Paranormal can include things like UAPs. Paranormal can include things like Sasquatch, right? All those kinds of stuff is all brought underneath the category of paranormal. 1 in 4 Americans actually believes in a paranormal belief. But here's the thing. There's been really good sociological data done on this. There was 3 sociologists, 2 from Baylor University and 1 from a university in Florida. They did this massive study called Paranormal America. And they said, by the way, that, that the paranormal is now part of mainstream America. It used to be viewed as something that was sort of on the fringe, and they said no. It's now blended in, it's a part of mainstream America. This idea, by the way, that 1 in 4 Americans believes, you might have somebody that, for example, that believes in Bigfoot, but they may say, no, all that UFO stuff, that's just bogus stuff, right? Or you might have somebody that believes in the UFO stuff and say, well, this whole idea of Bigfoot, that's bogus, right? So we talked about those as paranormal particularists, people that have paranormal beliefs, but in a certain area. By the way, a lot of the Bigfoot hunters, what they're trying to do is to try to prove that this is scientific and what they're doing in their study, and that these are real animals that they're trying to look at. Now, you also have what's called paranormal generalists. These are people that just believe the whole gamut. They buy into the poltergeists and ghosts and ESP and whatever it is, throw it on because we love the smorgasbord of paranormal beliefs, right? They're going to the hometown buffet of paranormal phenomenon. They're like, give me a little of that, and give me a little of that, give me a little of that. The particularists are only going to the meat, because that's only one I like. Keep away from the vegetables, right? But everyone else is just throwing everything on. So, but understand that's a part of our mainstream American fabric. And by the way, just know all the reality programs dedicated to paranormal on television, right? You will find anything on there, all kinds of things going on. Very fascinating that's going on here in America. By the way, I believe, and I'm just going to say this and I want to move on, I believe that the fact that we have such a rise in paranormal beliefs in the US, that's actually an American way of trying to get at this middle tier phenomenon. It's Americans who are dissatisfied with the materialist agenda that they've been fed through schools. It's Americans that are having themselves experiences that don't fit into those categories they've been taught. And so they're saying, I believe that this is a way of getting at this kind of middle tier phenomena. So I call it paranormalism, which I do think it's kind of a new version of animistic beliefs.
If you look at it, you know what, the gifts of the Spirit, that part of the gifts of the Spirit, 9 gifts of the Spirit, is working some miracles. It doesn't specify.
Right.
It doesn't get into that.
Yep.
There's soul travel, there's interdimensional travel through that because somebody might be able to do it, they can't explain how things are done or show proof because you have to get them to go with you on your journey to show them.
Right.
That doesn't mean it doesn't exist or disappear.
Right. Well, and the idea that somebody has an experience with something, right? And just because multiple people haven't had that experience doesn't mean that their experience automatically is discounted, right? Like what you're saying. So
Hollywood's using all this to brainwash people so that they don't believe in God. Because all these things, paranormal, aliens, this and that, you can't really prove it. They go, well, then you can't really prove God either. They're using this to brainwash people and screw them up mentally so they can't. And that's why the amount of people who are believing in God and Christianity has gone down, because they put all this doubt in people.
yeah, but here's the thing. I'm going to challenge your comment there for a moment, because I've done study and I've written on this in regards to skepticism in America. And have you heard of the rising category of the nuns? Yes. We're not talking about the ladies in the habit. We're talking about NONES. That means on U.S. Census data, when the question gets asked, what religion are you? They check the box, none. By the way, none, by the way, means they're not a particular religion, but what they're finding out, there's a lot of them. And by the way, none does not mean that they're automatically atheistic. None, what they're finding is that these people are spiritual but not religious. And the data shows that a lot of these people actually refer to their spirituality as post-Christian spirituality. So they still believe in the existence of this phenomena, but they just don't believe in the Christian definition of it. So there's a lot of people in the US that are very open to spiritual things. They just don't like the idea of being boxed in a particular religion, right? So we could talk about that as a separate thing, but by the way, the fact that this stuff is increasing, these beliefs, is because of the fact that the nun category is increasing too as well. So it's not people who are getting rid of the idea of anything supernatural, it's just they're saying, I don't want to be a part of institutionalized religion.
Last Pew was 23%, I thought.
Yeah, yeah.
The what?
Last Pew research was 23% of people identified as.
You know, they're saying they found another pyramid, like the Egyptian pyramids in the Arctic Pole. How could that happen? They're saying there's one there.
Yeah, I take them with a grain of salt. I don't always believe what they say. Did you have sorry, you had your hand up earlier.
In their research, did they include the standard historical definition of people who believe in angels and demons as part of this one?
Yeah, you know what's fascinating about the book Paranormal America is they also, part of their research was, and they did a lot of conversations, in talking with people who are religious oriented, they found that religious people who believed in angels would say, no, that's religious, that's not paranormal.
Yeah. I mean, I would have said the same thing.
Yeah. So it's fascinating. The book is fascinating, by the way. Again, it's a scholarly book, but it's easy to read because it was 3 sociologists that did this huge study. Chapman University was involved in it and those kinds of things too. You can actually go on Chapman University. They have their annual Fears study, American Fears study. And so some of that work came out of that, where they talked about that, how they discovered the Americans and the idea of the paranormal. But yeah, they found that Christians automatically will tend to say, well, no, that's not paranormal, that's religious phenomena, and they make this distinction. It's interesting because the authors get a little disgruntled because they're like, well, why can't angels be considered paranormal? But here's the thing, if you're not a Christian and you believe in angels, guess what category you put it in? The paranormal. Yeah. Right? Because a lot of people will believe in angels, right? They like this idea of angels. When I was in Burbank years ago, I remember this lady came to us in the church, and she was telling me, yeah, I really believe in angels. I love the idea of angels and those kinds of things. And so internally, my internal dialogue is like, oh, you're one of those. Yeah. Now, fortunately, as a minister, I have a filter that still works. And so I didn't say that out of my mouth. And she asked for prayer. And so what I did was, being a good Lutheran, I'm like, okay, we believe in the existence of angels and that God sends angels to protect us. And so I wrapped my prayer up with that, but making sure it had a Christocentric focus, right? Yeah. So that's actually a missiological engagement, right? I believe in angels. I don't believe the same way. So what I want to do is I want to take that, I'm going to redirect that for you a little bit. So.
It's like a good shaman would do.
You can't trust the government either. You see Buzz Aldrin, he was on the news, he said he didn't step on the earth. He said it was a big movie you were watching.
Yeah.
All kinds of crap.
Again, you have to take a lot of stuff with a grain of salt. You have to be very careful with some of that stuff. Yeah.
It's a big business. They're making
centers, thousands of people go there. It's just money, money, money.
It is, yep.
Brainwashing people more. I couldn't believe thousands of people going to conventions.
Yep.
Paying big bucks for that.
Yep. By the way, I've noticed, so I live in Irvine, I've noticed the increase of psychics in Irvine. So there's actually a storefront psychic person in Irvine, and probably about a couple miles down the road in a neighborhood, this person has their sign right up in front of their house, psychic. So I'm starting to see an increase of that too as well, which fits into, because psychic phenomena fits in this category.
We have a little guest house that says sidekicks.
Sidekicks.
You know, they said that no one ever landed on the dark side of the moon, but the Chinese just landed on the dark side of the moon. They were saying on the news, I don't know if you can believe it or not, but they were saying the Chinese landed on the dark side of the moon. We never landed on the dark side. Nobody knew it was on the dark side of the moon. You know, you ever see it? And the Chinese just landed on the dark side of the moon.
Again, you got to take out a lot of stuff with a grain of salt of what's going on there, right? All right. So what I want to do is I want to cycle back and I want to talk about how do we approach this from a Lutheran understanding, all right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you actually a lot of quotes from Luther, okay? Because Luther engaged with this stuff. Luther also not only had personal experience, but he also did a lot of counseling with other people who were dealing with phenomena. And so there's two things, by the way, out of a Lutheran approach I take. First of all is start from a place of cautious openness and not skepticism. And I believe Luther does this. When someone comes and talks to me and they say, I think there's haunted phenomena going inside my house, I don't start off this idea of like, okay, well, let's talk about the natural phenomenon that could be going here. I actually say, I have a cautious openness. There could be something supernatural. Why? Because our scripture talks about the reality of the unseen world. And so I will take it from of cautious openness, right? And I use that word cautious there purposely, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The other thing too, by the way, is that we understand the interpretive nature of the phenomenon. So I'm going to show you Luther quotes, and I'm going to show you how he has this cautious openness, but also you'll notice how he interprets the phenomenon too as well, all right? So let me start off with, this was a letter to another pastor who was dealing with the potential demonic possession of a woman in his church. And he says this about 10, so he's writing back to this pastor, right? And so he starts off and he says, about 10 years ago, we had an experience in this neighborhood with a very wicked demon. But we succeeded in subduing him by perseverance and by unceasing prayer and unquestioning faith. By this means, I have restrained many similar spirits in different places, for the prayer of the church prevails at last. What does Luther believe about that middle-tiered phenomenon? That it exists. He talks about his own experience with it, okay? So in writing to this pastor who is writing to him and saying, hey, this is what we're dealing with, Luther says, hey, we've dealt with similar kinds of things. He goes on. The second thing is this. Carefully investigate whether that woman might be practicing some fraud, by means of which all of you could be made objects of ridicule. In my own experience, apart entirely from what I've read in books, I have encountered such frauds, and afterward I reproach myself for my simplicity. The evil spirit takes delight, as he did from the beginning with Adam, in using a woman to make a fool of a man, if he cannot make him godless, as he much prefers to do. Ladies, don't take offense by what he's saying there, all right? Now, you'll notice what's he do here? What's he recognizing the possibility?
It could be a fraud.
It could be a fraud. This is Luther's cautious openness. I believe in the existence of this phenomenon. We've seen it, but I also know that it could be fraud going on here. By the way, I want you to know something else here. How does Luther also interpret the nature of fraud?
As a dramatic action.
Evil spirit takes delight, instigated by Satan.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? So Luther will say things like, whether it's actual, I'm going to use the phrase paranormal phenomenon, or it's a hoax, he says the author is the same of both. Lies, trickery, and deceit. So one of the things you have to understand about Luther is he really believes strongly that all misfortune in life had its origin in the devil, right? The Large Catechism. Last petition, right, of the Lord's Prayer. Luther said that we should translate that as deliver us from the evil one. We have it general evil. By the way, the Greek actually can be translated as evil one, and Luther says it should be translated as evil one. And then he goes on in description. He says that the devil is behind all kinds of things. He's not just a liar, but he's a murderer, and he drives people to despair. So Luther talks about how suicide has its cause of the devil, how the idea of drowning has a cause of the devil, how by the way, melancholy, which today we describe as depression, has a cause of the devil. But unlike certain Christian groups today, charismatic groups who will take the definition that if you're dealing with depression, there must be a demon, so I need to cast out the demon of depression, right? Luther's not going there. Luther would still say, for example, if you're dealing with depression, you should go and seek help with that. Pray about it, understand its origin, but seek help. He said the same thing about illness. The devil is behind illness. This is all part about the devil's kingdom, right? Physical illness. So he would say, pray about it, but if you're ill, what should you go do? Go to the doctor, right? This is where I love Luther being vocational, right? These are different callings. We can still see that the devil works this way, but God also works in these different callings to deal with these issues. So that's something I think that there's a holistic understanding that Luther has in regards to all this. Then he goes on. Therefore, we should not be inattentive and casual with regards to his fabrications and deeds, his realities and apparitions, but should fight against him with faith and prayer. The one whom he crucified lives. When I go into homes and I do exorcisms of place, one of the things that I do is I have a prayer that I pray, and it's a prayer that actually comes out of our house blessing rituals. And it talks about this idea of praying against not only protection against the devil, but also uses this phrase, vain imaginations. Right? Understanding that whole idea, right, that even in these, so let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. I was called into a situation where people thought there was something happening in their home and some sort of paranormal phenomena. And I always do an intake and I always do a narrative with people and talk with them about that. I wasn't convinced something really supernatural was going on. I convinced that the idea that there was some vain imaginations going on and their imaginations were running wild with them. But you know what? What did I do? I still did a house blessing. Because what's a house blessing doing? It's bringing the word of God and prayer to people's lives to bring comfort and the hope of Christ to them. So
Cast out the devil, the evil spirit.
Exactly. So regardless if something's happening or not, right? It's the same tools that I'm called to use. Yeah.
There is I don't know, there's some churches they do the incense when you do the prayer and cleansing of the spiritual. So the power of the incense, and a lot of churches are guessing that incense while they're doing the blessings and the,
I get really nervous with that because the incense stuff becomes almost like a magical ritual. One of the dangers that we see with coming and doing exorcisms that people treat this as a magical ritual. One of the things that I'm always very careful with people is that when I say, you have to understand when I'm coming in and doing this isn't a magical rite. It's just, I'm not saying the right words and all of a sudden the effect is going to occur, because you have to understand with magic, that's how they treat it, right? Incantations, and that's not what it is. And actually I tell them, I might come in and I might do this house blessing or this exorcism ritual and the phenomenon might not disappear. That doesn't mean that what I did was ineffectual. What I find with people, by the way, when the phenomenon doesn't disappear, it's because of the fact that they themselves are not embracing what they're supposed to be embracing. Right. Faith over fear. And that's what I tell them. And I always have a conversation. Are you in church? Are you actively going to worship? Are you in the study of God's word? I said, because that's where you focus in on it.
Have you discontinued the satanic music and the Ouija board?
Exactly. I always do.
Your addiction to heroin.
I always do a confession absolution with them too as well, because I find that the reason why the phenomenon tends to continue is because they are not doing to feed their faith, rather they're feeding the phenomena. And a lot of times what I find too is I tell them, don't pay attention to that. It might still bang around and try to draw your attention. Ignore it. You have confidence in the crucified one who conquered all this stuff, and if you stand in him in your baptism, you've also conquered all that stuff too as well. So, yeah.
In other words, what you're saying is this is a mission opportunity.
Yes, absolutely.
So many words, right?
Oh, 100%. This is the beautiful thing, is that the fact that there are people who are nominal Christians, or maybe even just like the spiritual but not religious, and they're dealing with something malevolent, and you come in and they're all like, oh, you're willing to help me with this? Yeah, and it's an opportunity to preach the gospel to them. And 100%. That's why I'm all about, like, let's go do these things for people and talk with them, because we're bringing Christ to them. I met a guy a few years ago who, at one point in time, he was part of a paranormal investigation team. And he said that this team was made up of like a former detective and some other people, and they actually went in when people said that they had ghostly things happening in their home, and they would come in and they would like investigate it and find out if something was going on. He said they were all Christian. He said that he said his involvement though was that because he saw as an opportunity for him to bring the gospel to people. And so he even told me a story. He's like, yeah, we actually discovered in one person's home that it wasn't anything paranormal going on. It was actually pipes that were rattling and making noise. And so he said to them, you know what, you really need to seek out a plumber to help you with this issue. But he said, he goes, I still had the opportunity to talk about Jesus with them. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, you know what, I can go along with that kind of thing that you see as a kind of an evangelism opportunity for me to go on and to bring Jesus in this situation. So let me share more Luther with you. This is a table talk he gave. You'll see the title there, Counseling a Boy Who Saw a Ghost. A certain youth, apprenticed to a blacksmith, has been deceived and frightened by nocturnal apparitions and had been led about all the streets from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the evening. Then he was interrogated by the specter as to whether he knew the catechism, was told that he had recently acted in an impious way, that he had received the sacrament in both kinds, bread and wine. Finally, he was told, if you go back to your master's house, I'll break your neck. Accordingly, he did not enter that house for several days. Luther says, we took the youth, they took the youth to Luther and gave him an account of the case. Luther then said that one should not be too quick to believe any and everybody, right? There's this cautious openism, right? For many fabricate such things. Even if he saw a ghost, he should not leave his calling. Wow. Thereupon, Luther questioned the youth about his conversation with Satan. Oh, how's he interpreting this? So, right? How did he just interpret the paranormal phenomena? It was Satan, right? Okay? If it was a ghost, it's not the dead. It was Satan, right? See to it that you don't like, he said, and said to him, see to it that you don't like, I have something else. Fear God, hear God's word, return to your master's house, and do the work of your calling. If Satan comes back, say to him, I won't obey you. I'll obey God who has called me to this work. Even if an angel should come from heaven and tell me otherwise, I'll remain in my calling. Luther, by the way, at one point in time talked about how he was experiencing stuff in his house, and he interpreted it as the devil banging around. And he said, you know what, devil, and it was keeping him up. He said, you know what, devil, if you want to bang around, if you think you're master of the house and bang around, okay, fine, go bang around. I know that you're not master of this house. And so guess what? I'm going to go back to sleep. That's the kind of confidence that he had, right, in what was going on here. Another one. On April 5th, a pastor came from the church in Suppitz near Torgau to complain of apparitions and disturbances caused by Satan. He said that Satan disturbed his peace and nocturnal tumults and the smashing of all the utensils in his house. This is poltergeist stuff. Satan, notice how he's interpreting poltergeist. All right? Satan hurled pots and dishes close to his head so they broke in pieces, and Satan annoyed him by laughing out loud, although he saw nothing of him. For, a whole year, the pastor said he had endured these and many other trials so that his wife and children wished to leave the house. Luther responded, dear brother, be strong in the Lord and firm in your faith. Don't give in to that robber. Notice how he's referring to it, right? Because notice how Luther, his response to people, all coming from Scripture, right? It's bathed in the Word of God. Suffer the outward things and the minor damage that comes from the breaking of pots, for it can't harm you in body and soul, as you have found, for the angel of the Lord is with you. Let Satan play with the pots. Meanwhile, Pray to God with your wife and children and say, be off, Satan. I'm Lord in this house, not you. By divine authority, I'm head of this household, and I have a call from heaven to be, I chopped off words there, from heaven to be pastor of this church.
That's right, that's a lot to that.
Right? He goes on. I have testimony from heaven and earth, and this is what I rely on. You enter this house as a thief and robber. You are a murderer and scoundrel. Why don't you stay in heaven? Who invited you to come here? In this way, you should sing him his litany and his legend. Tell him who he is and what he has done. And let him play as long as he pleases. Kind of like the kid in the sandbox, right? I was often, and here's Luther now, his personal testimony. I was often pestered by the devil when I was imprisoned in my Patmos. High up in the fortress in the kingdom of the birds, that was Wartburg. I resisted him in faith and confronted him with this verse. God who created man is mine and all things are under his feet. If you have any power over him, try it. I love Luther's boldness of faith here, right? And he says, right, I'm not some special person that has this boldness. This is for everybody who's in Christ. Luther, by the way, when he was in Wartburg, it was described that he oftentimes would hear disembodied footsteps outside his door, and he would open it up and there was nothing there. And then there's a whole story about the inkwell and whether that was true or not, where he threw it kind of thing, right? But he does describe that he encountered some kind of poltergeist stuff there too, and he ascribed it all to Satan attacking him, right? Satan attacking him.
And Satan, when you deal with Satan and that kind of thing, you have to speak it out.
Yeah.
Satan can't hear what you're thinking.
Luther was always about the idea of, just seeing it out loud, right?
Because he can't be bound if you don't speak it to bind.
Yeah, he's speaking the word of God. It's all about the word of God being spoken, right? By the way, this was quoted in a really interesting work by a scholar. And he actually was translating from a German work that's still untranslatable in English. So he translated it for me. Thank you. And this is Luther describing it. It's not a unique, unheard of thing for the devil to thump about and haunt houses. Notice the interpretation. In our monastery in Wittenberg, I heard him distinctly. For when I began to lecture on the book of Psalms, and I was sitting in the refectory after we had sung matins, studying and writing my notes, the devil came and thudded 3 times in the storage chamber, the area behind the stove, as if dragging a bushel away. Finally, as it did not want to stop, I collected my books and went to bed. I still regret to this hour that I did not sit him out to discover what else the devil wanted to do. I also heard him once over my chamber in the monastery. So he talks about different occurrences in his life having these kinds of phenomena that's coming after him. By the way, in a sermon he gave, notice after Easter, it's interesting because why is he going to talk about spirits? Why would Easter automatically get you to think about spirits? Right? When Jesus appeared, what did they all think first and foremost? Right. And so Jesus says, to prove that I'm not a ghost, give me something to eat, right? They didn't want to touch him even though they invited it. And I always think about the ideas like, I can imagine the disciples doing this like, you go touch him. I'm not going to touch him. You go touch him, right? Kind of thing. Right? So Luther says this, however, Scripture does not say or give any example that these are the souls of dead people and that they wander among people and seek help, as we believed previously in our blindness deceived by the devil. We have reason enough not to believe such apparitions of spirits straying about under the names of souls. First, Scripture says nothing anywhere about the souls of dead men who have not yet risen going about among the people, though everything else we need to know is sufficiently revealed in Scripture. Second, it's clear forbidden in Scripture to ask anything of the dead or believe them. Therefore, we should know that all these ghosts and apparitions which are seen or heard, especially with rumbling and rattling, are not the souls of men, but surely devils who are playing either at deceiving the people with false claims and lies or at frightening and afflicting them in vain. And then he says, then therefore, I don't want to go to that yet. Go back. Right? So he's talking about this idea, again, the interpretation, right? What are these things? It's Satan. And he says that Satan's doing 2 things, right? Deception or bringing fear to people. Or both and.
Sounds like our government.
Now,
Deception and fear.
Different subject.
Now, I want to bring one last thing to you and wrap up. And if you got questions, I'm happy to stay and we can talk more. But so Luther didn't just talk about poltergeists or ghosts. There was other phenomena in the German countryside that Luther also addressed, right? Remember how we talked about the paranormal has this very broad category with all kinds of beings and what's going on here. To do that, though, I want to talk about, in that day and age, there was this guy, Agricola, who was a Catholic guy who lived at the time of Luther. He actually wrote a zoology of basically animals in the mines and what was going on there. And so one of the things that he described that of one of the animals in zoology were hobgoblins. And so Agricola says this, then there are weak demons which some of the Germans, as also the Greeks, call hobgoblins. By the way, the German word there is kobold. That's how they described them, kobolds. Because they're imitators of human, for they passionately ridicule joy, and they seem to do many things, but they do nothing completely. Some call them mountain devils, since they are commonly noticeable in height, since they are certainly 3/4 as tall as a dwarf. Moreover, they appear as old men clothed in the manner of miners, as clothed with shirt and dressed with a piece of cloth hanging from their loins. These are not accustomed to do damage to miners, but they wander in wells and mines, and although they do nothing, they seem to trade themselves in every habit of laborers. Now they dig cavities, now they pour what is dug out into the vessels, and now they maneuver the hauling machine. Although in fact the dirt sometimes irritates the workers, nevertheless it rarely harms them. The hobgoblin never harms them unless at first provoked by loud laughter or insults. So this is the beliefs that were going on. By the way, in my research that I did, there were a number of Lutheran pastors that I interviewed that actually worked on Native American reservations across the United States. And when I was talking to them, I found something very fascinating. That some of them described how the Native Americans that they were working with encountered small people, dwarves. In fact, in Native American belief, they're called little people. And they described how they would encounter these little people. And it was fascinating to me because I actually didn't include it in the body of my dissertation. It actually became an appendix where I refer to as other paranormal creatures. Because it was interesting to read that and then to read the stuff about how they addressed this back in Luther's time, okay? So Luther, by the way, talks about these kobolds, and he says this, the devil vexes and harasses the workmen in the mines. He makes them think they have found fine new veins of silver, which when they have labored and labored, turn out to be mere illusions. Even open day on the surface of the earth, he causes people to think they see a treasure before them, which vanishes when they would pick it up. At times, treasure is really found, but this is by the special grace of God, and never had any success in the mines, but such was God's will, and I am content. He knew something about the mines because his father was a miner and was involved with it. So, but his description, by the way, is addressing this kind of phenomenon. But notice how he interprets it is that it's the devil dealing with these kinds of things, right? So he was very open to the idea that the devil appears in various ways and various forms.
How come they're not in the Bible? I never hear anything about little tiny people. I hear about giants, but not tiny people.
Yeah.
Goblins?
That's a whole other issue, yeah.
Are they in the Bible, these tiny people?
Not that I read.
By the way,
Giants.
I like to conclude with this, right? We all know this. And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God has willed his truth to triumph through us. The prince of darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure. One little word shall fell him, right? Although the world with devils filled, right? Luther talks about it in all those various ways. So again, this is the approach that I take in regards to thinking about the paranormal. What's fascinating is, remember, Hebert said that it was the 17th and 18th century that the change began to occur. Hebert talks very favorably about, in the Reformation, this stuff was still believed in regards to a three-tiered universe. And we see this with Luther. Luther believed in this idea, right, that there was still this engagement that was going on and that kind of thing. So anyway, that's my presentation for you. I'll hang around, and if there's questions you have that I can answer, I'm happy to do so, but I appreciate your time. So.
Thank you very much.